This is the most heartbreaking episode of the classic American TV series Better Call Saul. To ensure his father's safety, Nacho resolutely decides to sacrifice himself. In Nacho, we see a man caught in circumstances beyond his control, threatened by Gus. He has no choice but to betray the Salamanca family. Just when Nacho thinks he has completed his mission, he realizes that Gus intends for him to take the fall without any real plan to rescue him. Moreover, Gus reveals Nacho's location, ultimately leading to Nacho being surrounded by the ruthless cousins, desperate to survive. Nacho has no choice but to grit his teeth and drive his pickup truck towards the gate, because the cousins want to capture Nacho alive to uncover the mastermind behind the betrayal. They don't kill him outright but instead shoot out his tires to prevent his escape. Soon, the truck is forced to a halt due to the blown-out tires. Nacho exits the vehicle, ready to fight the cousins to the death. At that moment, he notices an abandoned oil tank nearby. Nacho thinks he might evade capture there, so he hurriedly runs towards the tank. Although the inside smells terrible, it is nothing compared to the value of his life. Nacho decisively crawls into the oil tank, using the decayed side panels to observe the situation outside. Soon, the cousins discover his abandoned pickup truck and begin searching the area. Unfortunately, Marco notices the nearby oil tank and starts walking towards it. Nacho had no choice but to hide in the waste oil of a corner tank. He pinches his nose, holds his breath, and plunges in. At that moment, Marco peeks inside but finds nothing unusual. Under Lionel's call, Marco left the area, and they continued their search elsewhere. When Nacho emerges, he is covered in oil and grime. He cautiously peers through a gap to confirm the cousins have left before he finally breathes a sigh of relief. Nacho no longer dares to venture out during the day and waits until nightfall to make his escape. Nacho didn't know which would come first, tomorrow or the accident. He tried to contact his father but his mobile phone was broken. Helpless, Nacho continues his flight. At dawn, he finds a water pipe to clean the oil off his body. Nacho thought no one was around, but he was still discovered by the shop owner, Samaritano. Nacho, on high alert, prepared to draw his gun. Samaritano has no ill intentions. He merely wants to give Nacho a towel to clean himself and provide some clean clothes. Nacho pulls out some cash, asking to use Samaritano's phone. Samaritano said he could use it without charging him. Nacho first calls his father. When Manuel heard that it was his son calling, he wasn't too excited. Knowing that Nacho was working for criminals, he had been trying to convince his son to turn himself in. However, Nacho didn't heed his father's advice and instead wants to take him on the run. Their last meeting ended on a sour note because of this. Manuel asks Nacho how he is and why he is calling. Nacho replies that there's nothing much. He just wanted to hear his father's voice. Nacho knows that in his current situation, one misstep could mean he would never hear his father's voice again. Manuel detected something strange in Nacho's voice. At this moment, Nacho was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. He choked up but forced himself not to reveal his true situation to his father because he didn't want him to worry. Manuel earnestly advised him to turn himself in. Nacho, choking up, nodded and agreed to his father's advice.
Sí, papá. Te entiendo. Te oigo.
¿Qué más queda de decir? Adiós, hijo.
Saddened, Nacho quickly adjusted himself because he still had unfinished tasks. He then made a mysterious phone call. Meanwhile, Gus, suspecting that Lalo was still alive, arranged for snipers to protect himself. His subordinates reported that Nacho was not answering his phone, and his location was unknown. As for Lalo, there was no news either. Mike suggested that if Lalo intended to take revenge, he would have arrived already. The fact that he hadn't shown up indicated he was hesitant to kill Gus. If something happens to Gus, the higher-ups will blame the Salamanca family, putting them in a difficult situation as well. Mike speculated that Lalo might be searching for Nacho. Once he found Nacho, he could force him to reveal the mastermind. Mike wanted to bring Nacho back quickly because he could guess what Nacho was going through. But no matter what Mike said, Gus remained expressionless. He even accidentally knocked over his glass while pouring water. This incident reflected that Gus, when faced with a tricky situation, could also be flustered. Gus picked up the broken glass from the floor, then told Mike to continue explaining his plan. Mike said the best plan now was to take a few elites and bring Nacho back, but he didn't know Gus's true intentions. Gus threw the broken glass into the trash can and then asked Tyrus to bring Nacho's father over. Hearing this, Mike firmly objected. Tyrus pulled out his gun and stood by Gus's side. Seeing this, Mike closed the door and stated that no matter what happened next, it wouldn't be the outcome Gus wanted. As the standoff continued, Mike's phone suddenly rang in his pocket.
It's him.
Oh, I've been calling Varg for hours. He hasn't picked up once.
He's been trying to get me since he left Salamanca's. You want me to answer it?
Gus nodded, allowing Mike to answer the call.
Yeah.
You knew that I was going to Mexico to die, that I was never supposed to make it out of that motel. And you let it happen.
Not my call.
What happens now?
That's up to you.
Is that bastard with you? Put him on.
He wants to talk to you.
Nacho's call was timely. He had seen through Gus's plan to pin the attack on Salamanca on him and then kill him. But now it was clear that Gus had not achieved his goal. Nacho knew who Gus was and understood that only Mike could be trusted to protect his father. Nacho proactively proposed a deal with Gus. He was willing to cover for Gus' lies on the condition that Gus guaranteed his father's safety.
If you are true to your word, there will be no reason for anyone to harm your father.
You are not the one that I need to hear it from.
Your dad's gonna be okay.
How do you know?
Because anyone who goes after him is gonna have to come through me.
Hearing this from Mike, Nacho felt relieved. To repay the garage owner, Samaritano, Nacho left all his money with him. This gesture implied that Nacho was ready for sacrifice. At night, Nacho was smuggled back. Mike prepared a last supper for him. Before Nacho could finish his meal, Gus's henchman Victor arrived. Seeing that Nacho had no apparent injuries, he wanted to beat him up for show. Mike drove Victor away, saying he would handle it himself. Mike helped Nacho because he saw a reflection of his own son in him. His son, like Nacho, was in a harsh environment but retained his inner goodness. In the dead of night, Gus came to check on Nacho and reviewed Nacho's script for the next day's execution to ensure everything was foolproof. Before he left, Mike asked to come with him tomorrow to make sure that something unexpected would happen. Left alone in the room, Nacho saw the broken glass shards Gus had thrown in the trash, and a bold idea popped into his mind. He picked up one of the glass shards. The next day, Mike, acting as a bodyguard, got out of the car early and reluctantly said his final goodbye to Nacho. Tyrus tied Nacho's hands but didn't notice the glass shard in Nacho's hand. The Salamanca family had been waiting for some time. Mike's sniper position was the same spot where he had previously prepared to assassinate Hector. Gus's men threw Nacho down and then escorted him to the Salamanca family. One ripped the tape off Nacho's mouth, stating that Nacho was doomed to die today. If he cooperated, his death would be quick. Otherwise, he would suffer. One asked Nacho who was behind this, and Nacho looked towards Gus. Gus felt a moment of panic. Nacho gripped the glass shard tightly, determined to control his own fate. He confessed according to the pre-rehearsed script, stating he had accepted favors from the Peruvian hate gang to frame Hector's nephew, Lalo. Hearing this, Hector furiously rang his bell in protest, pointing angrily at Gus. Seeing this, one assisted Hector in questioning Nacho about other accomplices.
Him? You think the chicken man? What a joke. Alvarez has been paying me for years. But you know what? I would have done it for free because I hate every last one of you. Psycho, sacks. He's a soulless pig. And I wish I killed him with my own hands. And you know what else, Hector? I put you in that chair. Oh yeah, your heart meds. I switched them for sugar pills. You were dead and buried, and I had to watch this asshole bring you back. So when you are sitting in your shitty nursing home and you're sucking down on your Jell-O night after night for the rest of your life, you think of me. You twisted.
Hearing Nacho's words, Hector was so enraged that he nearly stood up from his wheelchair. Nacho, having confessed everything, took the opportunity to cut his bindings and quickly held one hostage. The situation instantly descended into chaos. Mike saw the sudden change and tried to get Nacho to take one of them with him. But Nacho didn't do it because killing one wouldn't benefit Gus. Without achieving Gus's goal, his father's safety would be in jeopardy. In his final moments, Nacho decisively chose to end his own life. He preferred to die on his own terms rather than at someone else's hands. Do you remember what Nacho once said to Don Iladiao?
Quiero tomar mis propias decisiones, seguir mi propio camino. No quiero que nadie ni por un momento piense en jugármela y yo no quiero tener que estar viendo por encima de mis hombros.
Seemingly an ordinary couple, they lived with a group of heavily armed bodyguards. The couple carried on with their daily lives as if these men didn't exist. They did this to conceal their true identities. Their home was filled with surveillance equipment. Anyone who's ever watched Breaking Bad will recognize this door. That's right. This is the luxurious mansion of the notorious Gus. This cycling couple was also working for Gus. This was one of Gus's methods to protect himself by diverting attention. Remember when Walter, in Breaking Bad, mustered the courage to assassinate Gus, only to be spotted before he even reached the door? It shows how meticulous Gus was about his security. After watching Better Call Saul, we understand just how formidable the Gus Walter killed really was. To guard against Lalo lurking in the shadows for revenge, Gus wore a bulletproof vest every day and kept his gun with him 24/7. Gus wanted to take off his gun holster and relax, but knowing Lalo was still alive, he couldn't let his guard down. He strapped the holster back to his ankle. He then went to the basement and moved a cabinet against the wall. What appeared to be an electrical panel was actually a combination lock, which opened to reveal a tunnel leading to a surveillance room across the street. To confuse his enemies, Gus arranged for a double to go to his own house. Upon reaching the other side, the couple continued to do their thing as if Gus wasn't even there. Gus arrived at the surveillance room. Mike mentioned that they had been monitoring for a long time without any sign of Lalo and had checked other possible locations too. Mike thought Gus was being overly cautious, suggesting that Lalo might really be dead, but Gus insisted on his perspective. Gus's judgment was correct. At that moment, Lalo had already reached a bar in Germany. To find evidence that could bring Gus down, Lalo tracked down Werner's widow, Margarethe. Werner had once worked on a project for Gus. Previously, Lalo had extracted some information from Werner over the phone. He knew that Werner's wife, Margarethe, was about to arrive in New Mexico, so he mentioned a familiar place to catch her attention. Quickly, Lalo used his humorous, charming, and gentlemanly demeanor to win Margarethe over. They introduced themselves and naturally sat down together to drink and chat. Under Lalo's sly guidance, the unsuspecting Margarethe soon talked about her husband's accident in the US. She had been told that a cave-in accident led to her husband's unfortunate death. Lalo probed for details about Werner's specific project. However, Margarethe explained that her husband's work was confidential, and he had never mentioned any specifics. Seeing this route was blocked, Lalo decided to approach Werner's colleagues. Unfortunately, none of them attended Werner's funeral. Hearing this, Lalo was somewhat speechless. To gather more clues, he patiently continued chatting with Margarethe about other topics. They talked late into the night, and Lalo, still very gentlemanly, escorted Margarethe home. By this time, Margarethe was quite taken with the charming man before her, but out of respect for her late husband, she did not invite Lalo in. After saying goodnight, Lalo pretended to leave. He then spent the whole night watching from the shadows. The next day, after Margarethe went to work, Lalo quietly broke into her house, hoping to find some useful clues. It must be said, Lalo's emotional intelligence is incredibly high. Even Margarethe's dog was charmed into behaving obediently. If you were a woman, could you resist such temptation? Lalo sneaked upstairs and began searching through the house, but then Margarethe came home, having forgotten her mobile phone in her haste to leave the house. Hearing the noise, Lalo quietly drew his gun. Margarethe retrieved her phone and was about to leave when her dog started barking incessantly. She opened the door to see what was wrong. She hadn't yet picked up the dog when it quickly ran to the top of the stairs. Margarethe put the puppy back and then she was going to sneak upstairs to see what was going on. At that crucial moment, Lalo saw a handmade object, a souvenir given to him by Werner's apprentice, and a key message underneath. Hearing Margarethe's footsteps, Lalo hurriedly put the item back. When Margarethe came upstairs, she found nothing amiss. Looks like she had a false alarm. Just as Margarethe was about to leave, she suddenly realized that the upper window had been left open. Little did she know, she had just had a close brush with death.